Hey everyone, so in this series of videos I'm talking about 14 layers of strategy and how they apply to river flows in U. And in general on this channel I hope to empower you to advance at the piano with maximum efficiency, quality, and independence through strategy and mindset ideas. And I believe I mentioned in previous videos in this series, typically I'll talk about layering dozens or even hundreds of layers of strategy on top of each other in my teaching. But here I've just arbitrarily chosen 14 layers. It is just one possible way out of many, or probably an infinite combination of different ways that you could go about doing this. I just thought an extended example would be useful. So definitely could be in a different order. They could be different concepts. There's many other concepts that are not covered in this series. So yeah, so far we have talked about separate hands, slow, independent, and to quality. We've talked about going super small. We've talked about an overlapping note always at the end of each given section, writing all the fingering beforehand, going through spaced repetition. I might talk about each one briefly as the video goes on as well. Oh, and also super briefly, the reason that we're doing this is because, for instance, when we're working on separate hands, being careful and observant and everything, it's not like spaced repetition stopped having an effect, right? And if we work on spaced repetition, it's not like the idea of having an overlapping note that became irrelevant, right? They're all independently powerful. Therefore, we should continue doing everything which works instead of just using them as isolated tips and tricks, right? So that's kind of part of the underlying premise of what we're trying to do here. So now, the next thing that we want to try to do, except we're going to do it with this instead of the highlighter, I'll just say is logical notation. So this is starting to get into my logical methodology. You could also call it logical methodology if you wanted to say it that way. And this is basically the idea that we want to start to keep track of some of our work in terms of the notation part, right? So if you watched the last video in terms of spaced repetition, you know that we're doing sections, moving on from them, and then coming back to them. But how do we keep track of what it is we've done so far? I've talked with many colleagues, friends, other teachers, other professional pianists, and so on. Surprisingly, I have not yet found, and I wouldn't be surprised if I found somebody else with a notation like this, but it's really just keeping track of like the little tiny sections that we've done up to this point, right? So, and I think at the end of this video I'll circle back around and talk about briefly how do we account for these other layers so that you don't think I'm only doing this in isolation. But this is really about like kind of keeping track of the work that we've done so far. So if you look at other videos on my YouTube channel, there's definitely other extended examples of the logical methodology already in action. This is kind of starting kind of more basic than that. Like, assuming that you don't know anything about how it works or anything, I'll just explain the notation again. But if you want to see like kind of more extended examples, you can definitely find that on the channel. There's some about like Fiorelis. There was one about a Chopin waltz. Like there's different examples on there. So in general, for separate hands now, I actually will just use regular square brackets to indicate if I've practiced something separate hands, and then I'll use these fancy curly brackets or braces if we do both hands, right? So SH just stands for separate hands, BH just stands for both hands. And we are always accounting for the idea of an overlapping note, right? Like I talked about that in a previous video, you saw that on the list just now. So I call them sets in my logical methodology when we're starting to explain the notation here. And it just means that we're always accounting for the overlapping note idea, right? When we talk about a set. So if I say a one measure set, that means one measure plus the following note, or the following beat, or the following vertical. Sometimes I say vertical because it could be a single note, it could be more than one note at the same time. If I say a two measure set, that means two measures plus the following beat, or the following note, right? So that means this entire section over here. And if I say a half measure set, that means half of a measure, right? We can see, probably you can tell visually that this is half of a measure, right? Because there's like kind of 4 things over here and there's 4 things over here, even if you don't read music. And then we always want to include the following note or the following beat, right? If we were to practice the second half measure set, it would be this second half of the measure plus the following note or the following beat. So that's what we mean when we're talking about sets, half measure sets, 1 measure sets. So these other markings, these triangles, these stars, which I touched upon in the previous video, they are just to let beginners, intermediate students understand where are the fractions of a measure. And sometimes it's a useful reminder also when I'm explaining to advanced students for the first time if they haven't seen this sort of thing before. So I would recommend making these sorts of markings. The colors don't matter. The colors are really just for fun and to make things visually clear. So the stars are denoting the 1 measure set markers. You got to play from star to star to solve a 1 measure set. The triangles are denoting half measure set markers. You have to play from triangle to triangle here in order to solve, like play well to quality, the half measure set. The circles are quarter measure set markers, right? So you play quarter measure plus the following beat. The spirals are 1/8 measure set markers. In this case, I even use these tiny rectangles for 16th measure set markers. So yeah, so no need to go crazy over understanding that, but they're really just to help you visually to understand how the measures break down. If you don't know where the half, quarter, 1/8, etc. points are in the measure, you just make your best educated guess based on how visually it looks. For instance, here there's 8 things in the measure, so you can reasonably assume, because they look similar, even if you don't read music, that 4 notes is half of a measure, or like 2 notes is a quarter of, they comprise a quarter of a measure, right? So just some thoughts there. And then in terms of like the actual notation itself, because none of that, like these shapes and stuff, they are not the actual notation. They are basically just nice little visual reminders. The actual solving of them, like if I actually play like this part, for instance, right? If I do that little part from the beginning, I will go ahead and mark, actually no, I guess it should be square brackets because this is only right hand alone, not both hands. I would mark half. Because I played half of a measure plus the following note, right, from triangle to triangle. That's why I marked this half measure set marker here. And then if I play from here to here, I would again mark that. So I'll mark half measure set marker. Notice that resulted in a point of overlap over here, where the triangle is, right? Because I played the first 5 notes. Oopsies, okay, I played these notes. And then I also played the 5 notes in yellow, from that exact point, which is what resulted in this green overlap, right? So anyway, so this is how you would keep track of separate hands. I know we haven't even talked about both hands yet up to this point, which is okay. We'll talk about that. Forget if it's in the next video or the one after that, but this is how you would keep track. I'm no longer doing these little dashes outside of it, but yeah, if we were to play left hand alone, like I were to play like from here to over there, maybe I also include this note, right? So I would mark this half if I got that. Same thing if I were to play from over here to here, right? Up to this spot, I'd play. And if I got that, I'd mark that half over there. If I were to play both hands correctly, like let's say that I played from star to star here, and that actually went perfectly smoothly. Right? If I were able to do that, I would mark a 1 with these curly brackets. So this will enable me to keep track of my work, right? If I move on, then I come back after some time and I go over the beginning again, I'm like, oh yeah, I did halves here before. Let me go ahead and review that. right? That lets me remember what it is that I did the time before. I could also try to like increase their size if I wanted to, and we can talk about sort of the concept behind that, like I said, another time soon. So basically it just enables you to keep track of all of your work, both separate and both hand sets. And yeah, going back to, I guess, let me see if I'll strategically erase some of these things. Going back to here, now that we have this notational system, as you can see, like in general, I am trying to, well, you can play slower than this, certainly. Sometimes I'm playing a little bit more up to speed. I'm being careful. I'm reading the notes correctly. I'm preserving the quality, keeping things really solid and clear. Not worrying about musicality during this series, starting with separate hands, playing super small sections, always having an overlapping note. In the methodology, because of the sets I just mentioned, like we always account for an overlapping note. We're always starting small, we're being careful, preserving that quality. We're always writing all the fingering, or I suggest to write all the fingering. We're going through spaced repetition because we're moving on from things and then coming back instead of doing them over and over again. And now we have a way to keep track of the work that we've done so far because we have the logical methodology, and in this case specifically the notational system, so that even after a few days, a week, if we were to come back to this, we would know exactly the particular small sections that we practiced down to the fraction of a measure, right? So that's really how powerful it is in terms of accounting for everything. So yeah, hope you found that helpful. If so, please like, subscribe, tell people about the channel. Let me know what you think in the comments below, and looking forward to talking through more layers with you next time.